yesterday. And Daniel Jeremiah is a guy who's just about universally well respected, straight shooter, good dude. Like even in the NFL where there are a bunch of solid good dudes, he's especially a good dude. And he always takes pain to point out that his mock draft is based on what he's hearing, not as much as what he thinks, because he does his top 50 draft prospects. Doesn't always match up with what comes up in the mock draft, but we'll get right into it. And then I also want to go, I'm going to, if we have time, watch a video that was done about a month ago before the hire of DeMeco Ryans, illustrating all the stupidity of the Houston Texans over the past couple years. I want to go through and give it an evaluation and see what things genuinely were stupid versus, okay, where have we gotten unfair criticism at times. But Daniel Jeremiah, and I know many of you have seen this, but this will be a good little thought exercise. He starts off by saying, and I just told you, Jeremiah is a good dude. I like Jeremiah. He says Houston has not only been bad, they've been boring. Adding Bryce Young and Jordan Addison would make this offense instantly fun and watchable. I can't argue with him there. I mean, they have been a boring offense. It's been a really boring offense, especially after watching Deshaun Watson for years, wherein even if the offense wasn't doing well, Deshaun added an element of excitement to it. And then I think even last year, under Tim Kelly, and then maybe under slightly different circumstances, Davis Mills looked like a more, I don't know if exciting is the word, a less boring quarterback in 2021. 2022, it wasn't that way. So I will give Daniel Jeremiah on the basis of him actually being accurate. But spoiler alert, he chooses Bryce Young and Jordan Addison in his mock draft 2.0. Couple little surprises there. Tyree Wilson you saw. But he says Bryce Young is the best quarterback in the class. I think he'll fit beautifully with the Texans as they try to work their way up in the AFC South. I think that Dr. Matters says XFL games are more exciting. So I think that one thing, obviously, that's going to come up over and over and over again is that Bryce Young's size is the biggest issue. Jeff Howe from The Athletic wrote a piece after the Senior Bowl, and this echoed what a lot of other people had said, was that Bryce Young is generally considered the best prospect by most of the teams out there. It's just a matter of who's got an appetite for a guy who's very, very small. One thing that we've talked about on here and on Payne and Pendergast in the morning is that I do think that Bryce Young, more so than other quarterbacks, needs to just take it upon himself, much like Tom Brady has, to take injury prevention and put it in his own hands. So it's not just about avoiding big collisions. It's knowing how to fall properly, knowing how to take a collision. And we saw something this morning. Tua Tagovailoa disclosed something he's doing in the offseason that I think he's probably going to get ribbed for some, but I think is a really smart move.
We got like a plan set up, and I'll be doing judo on Fridays just so that I can kind of figure out, like understanding my body and how to fall and
Wait, that's what judo does?
You're about to be more dangerous than ever, man.
Oh man, not trying to be a dangerous person in that way. Just trying to help
understand
help
the
myself
body and movement. Yeah.
I think that's amazing.
Yeah. So, like a lot of you guys know, I really, really like that idea. I wrestled in high school, from whenever you start wrestling, like 5 years old up through high school. And honestly, one of the best things it did for me is it teaches you how to fall. Between that and having a big brother who was just an incredible bully, I learned how to take a fall and take a punch, take a hit, take some ribbing, and I think Tua, kind of like RG3, doesn't quite have that. So with judo, which by the way, the whole judo chop thing, judo's not about chopping and punching. It's a lot like wrestling. And a lot of it has to do with throws. So learning how to take throws and things like that could really help him. I think that as long as he's got somebody that knows what they're talking about and how to apply it to football, then I like that. As Omar says, maybe Bryce can take judo classes. Yeah, look, man, judo, whatever it might be. And as Dr. Mater says, just trying not to scramble my brain on the turf anymore. That's not what he said directly. But yeah, that's what Bryce is doing. Look, we're gonna have so many conversations about Bryce Young's size over the next couple of months. It's gonna get so old. We're gonna get so tired of it. I'm gonna try to increasingly ask more actual medical professionals instead of just my own brain as to exactly how much greater the risks are. All of that, but the Jordan Addison is the second guy. Now Jordan Addison is a receiver. He's not my receiver of choice, but he is very, very good. And there we go. Houston instantly adds some firepower for number 2 overall pick Bryce Young. The selection of Addison, along with the return of John Metchie III, would give the receiving core a huge boost. I want to give Daniel Jeremiah some credit here for including John Metchie. And I've got a little taste of John Metchie for you guys in case you've forgotten just how fun he was to watch in college at Alabama. And obviously, I don't want to say it would be a poor man's Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow, but I think the reunification of Bryce Young and John Metchie would be something cool. At the very least, it would be, there'd be some nonverbal communication there, perhaps a little bit of being on the same wavelength. But it would be 2 undersized guys. And I think if you look at Jordan Addison, I saw an Emmanuel Sanders comp the other day. I don't know if that's exactly right. Addison's about 175, not a big dude at all. There's something about drafting 2 really small guys in the first round. And even though Addison is a guy that, these days, guys that are slot size can play on the outside, and offenses get pretty creative about how to get those guys open without having to beat press man and all of that. But I'm not quite sure I can go for it because there is another guy that I like more, and we'll get to that. But if you want to we'll take a quick look at what this mock draft looked like. Jalen Carter went number 1 overall to the Bears. 3 technique for that defense. It's kind of ironic. Like the Bears would love to have a guy who is the kind of guy that Lovie Smith would want to have on his defenses back in the 2000s, which Lovie Smith may have provided them an opportunity to get Jalen Carter by winning that game, which I do not fault him for. But I hadn't even thought of it from Chicago's perspective. I saw Kyle Long's podcast, and Kyle Long was telling it from the Chicago perspective that, hey, look, Lovie Smith was already well regarded in Chicago, and now he gave the gift. Son of a, you know what? I might have to rethink that now. Maybe Lovie really was just trying. He still got a place in Chicago, He and his wife spent a night at their place up there before the Texans played up there. All right, now I'm getting retroactively angry, but for now, Chicago has that pick. Tyree Wilson went before Will Anderson. But the one thing to note here is, okay, C.J. Stroud goes to the Colts. There's 1 edge rusher off the board. Now with Will Anderson, there's 2 edge rushers off the board. Miles Murphy, that's a 3rd edge rusher off the board. Remember, the Texans have the 12th spot that we're waiting on. The Raiders go with Will Levis. I'm not so sure about that, just because I keep boldly predicting that Aaron Rodgers is going to be the guy in Las Vegas. But if Will Levis goes there, that's fine. Lucas Van Ness, who's frankly a little too apple pie looking for me. He's got a little prep school image to him there. I like my pass rushers kind of psychotic. He looks like a nice kid. Peter Skoronski, offensive line. The Texans, for now, as long as they whip up something for Laramie Tunsil, and even if they don't, they're set at offensive tackles for now. The cornerbacks, the offensive tackles, and then Jordan Addison goes. I'm going to be conflicted if one of those pass rushers, though, is still available when the Texans pick at 12. If Addison goes before them and there's a pass rusher available, the one guy that I'm going to be looking for after we go past Christian Gonzalez and Joey Porter Jr. I don't know what the hell's going on with all these guys who had fathers that are my age or younger playing in the NFL, now making it in the NFL, but I'm not a huge fan of it. Anthony Richardson goes to the Lions, and Bijan Robinson, who I don't think the Texans should be interested in getting. I don't want a Saquon Barkley type situation here where you end up, maybe being a couple years away from being genuinely competitive, and then your running back gets beat the crap out of them. Although Damian Pierce. No, not at 12. Maybe if the Texans trade up into the first round or something. But if there was some scenario where Bijan Robinson falls to the second round because, he's a running back and he and Damian Pierce can be a combo, I would not kick that out of bed at all. Jackson Smith, Njigba is another possibility for the Texans. But then Quentin Johnston is the guy that I would like the Texans, if he's available, to take at number 12. And there are a few specific reasons for that. A lot of it has to do with what we know of Slowick, the offensive coordinator, and his time in San Francisco. It's about D'Amico Ryans and the level of physicality with which he wants to play. Let me know. Brian Bryce is an interesting one, too, as a defensive lineman. Michael Mayer, the tight end. I think there might have been 3 tight ends in that class. As far as that's another question too, tight ends and exactly how they might fit in this offense and whether it would be worth going for one in the first round. But Cameron Wagner says you're old, Seth. We all know it. I know. The old guys that are having kids now could have been my illegitimate child, at least, if I'd had one of those high school teacher situations as a high school student or something. When I was the high school student, my God, not me as the high school teacher. So for what it's worth, this is the mock draft composite, which shows you basically of all the mock drafts, what's the most common selection for the Texans right now. And they don't do trades necessarily. Bryce Young and Quentin Johnston are the guys. And that's been kind of alarmingly consistent. If you have not gotten a peek at these guys yet, here's Jordan Addison from USC. Look, he's a really, really good route runner. He's really smooth. He's got quick feet. Those 2 legends of the game approve. One of whom went to USC, Ronnie Lott. Jerry Rice went to a small school, but he's got flat out speed, and he's shifty. He's got a little bit of a slippery violence to him. The biggest thing about him, honestly, is just how wired are you to have a small wide receiver on your team? Are you old school, or are you, do you want a number 1 receiver who's more of a Johnston type, or an Andre Johnson type for that matter? So the Texans could end up with their second Big Johnson if they take Johnston. I'm going to show you Quentin Johnston here. There was one scout who said this about him. He's 6'3", 215 pounds, and can win on all 3 levels. He puts up 20 yards per catch, runs great routes. He's super smart and alpha. And this is the big one, the hardest worker on the team. And that's important. I want to watch him first. I grabbed one from his rookie year where you can see the first time I watched him, I was seeing his rookie highlights, and I'm like, my God, this guy's a string bean. I don't know about this. But he was a string bean that had a lot of juice to him, and we'll transition into the more recent stuff. He put on some good weight and mass. He's still got kind of like a Randy Moss strength to him, where, remember, Randy Moss was he wasn't deceptively fast, he was deceptively strong. He never would have looked like it, but he could out-muscle guys for balls. But this right here, he took a screen and went 10 yards breaking 3 tackles. You see this over and over and over again out of him. And you can say whatever you want about Big 12 defense or whatever. I mean, he's just trucking these dudes. The one criticism I saw of him that concerned me at first for one reason, which was that he's not consistently physical. And, I think that's hard to judge sometimes. I think sometimes, especially when you've seen a guy kick butt, you expect him to kick butt every single play, and when he doesn't, it's a disappointment. I didn't see that to be a problem, but the other side of that is that he gets dinged up some. The one scouting report said he loses some speed and explosion when playing injured. And I know he doesn't come in and out of his breaks necessarily all that violently. He needs to work on his route running. But the 49ers, and we've talked about this, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, those are just hosses. And those guys made it so easy for Jimmy Garoppolo, who I go back and forth on Jimmy Garoppolo. He's not as bad as I sometimes feel. He's not as good as I sometimes feel. But they made Jimmy Garoppolo look better in a lot of ways. I think they especially helped out Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy had some games where the receivers had 10 yards after catch on average. And it's because they have these big physical dudes, whether it's those two receivers we're talking about, whether it's George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey. Those guys make it a whole lot easier on a young quarterback. If you think about Jordan Addison and whether you use him primarily in the slot or otherwise, first of all, slot receivers tend to take a little while. They tend to be a little bit more of a slow burn and slower developers because for those guys to be good and to overcome the issues with their size, they got to learn how to read defenses real well. And that's a hard thing to do. Likewise, quarterbacks have to figure out how to use those guys real well. And it's not always so simple as when you have, think about Deshaun Watson throwing to DeAndre Hopkins. That's a dream scenario, obviously, but that's a no-brainer in a lot of ways. That's, hey, I trust that guy to get open. I got a good feel for it. I feel like I can place the ball between DeAndre and the sideline, and then there you go. So with Addison, not that you want to be drafting specifically for this year, but if you think Johnston and Addison are somewhat similar, I would say just go for it. Cameron Wagner says, I've heard essentially that drops and catch radius are his knocks. I don't know if you're talking about Addison or Quentin Johnston. Quentin Johnston, I was kind of surprised that I didn't see his drop rate mentioned more often, so I wanted to check that out a little bit more because I might have just been reading the stats differently. Ro Bezel says most reports say QJ relies too much on body catches, which may not be the best for a number one receiver. That makes sense too. And I think there aren't really a bunch of perfect prospects in this draft. Not that there ever are, but there's one guy. I'm too influenced by DK Metcalf. There's something about DK Metcalf and the lesson we learned from relying too much on, route running ability for a raw dude and a 3-cone drill. Remember, DK Metcalf had like the worst 3-cone drill of any. Like if he was a nose guard, we would have said, I don't know about that 3-cone drill. And yet sometimes you just gotta say, all right, this guy's physically dominating. And the report that he's an alpha and a hard worker, that kind of did it for me more than anything. Because if there's one thing you don't want, it's a guy that's physically dominating and just relies on that and doesn't really have any dog to him. I feel like he has that. Andre Johnson is a guy whose hands got better from really just in his rookie year. And actually, Andre, you guys, some of you have heard this story before, but Andre, the first rookie minicamp he had, I can't remember if he was wearing a visor or he had a contact lens issue or something, but he couldn't catch anything. He was dropping it looked like he was Omer Ashik trying to catch a pass. It was really, really bad. And it turned out he had some kind of issue, but a bunch of us veterans who were out there, just watching the rookie minicamp because we'd finished our workouts, and everybody's kind of looking at each other like, this is Andre Johnson. This isn't the Andre Johnson I remember from television. And he ended up just being fine. Spoiler alert. So Brady Langston says, giving the most explosive offensive player available every pick after Bryce Young. What's the chance that they're all duds, right? Yeah. I do think I do like Nick's maneuvering, just the fact that he wants to maneuver. Remember Brian Gain didn't make a single draft day trade, and you just kind of felt like you're sitting out there on a boat in the ocean with no motor on it, like you were just taking whatever came to you, and you hope you don't get eaten by sharks. Nick's got a plan, and I know he gets, when he starts talking about it, he kind of talks about it in chunks of players that you're trying to get to a spot in the draft where there's a good group of guys that you like. So that'd be an interesting way to look at this draft over the next couple months, is kind of figure out, all right, where do we think the chunks of players are likely to be? Like with tight ends especially. Tight ends might be a fun position to watch with all the draft capital that the Texans have, which could include trading up into the first round for a third pick in the first round, or trading back in the first round, or doing whatever. Some of these tight ends, if they're, for 3 tight ends to go in the first round, it feels like teams still despite tight ends making such a big difference, it still feels like a lot of teams don't think you should really draft a tight end in the first round unless he's an exceptional talent. That might be something to watch for. If you think about Nick's background in New England and think about D'Amico's background, both in Houston and in San Francisco. I mean, you had Owen Daniels, who was a 4th rounder. You had the Hernandez fella, pleasant guy, who was a 3rd rounder. You had Gronk, who was a 2nd rounder. George Kittle, 5th rounder. And there's a history between both these guys of finding good, solid, to all-pro caliber, to Hall of Fame caliber guys outside of the first round. And I think some of that's going to stick there. I think if one of these guys falls to late first round or in the second round, then you might look for a tight end. Okay, this isn't. I'll tolerate none of this, Tony. Texans need to bring back Kahale Waring. He's been with a lot of teams by now. There's something about Kahale Waring that I can't figure it out. Teams signed him. Remember, he was on like 4 teams in 8 days for some reason. I don't know if he had like a Carlos Correa medical type issue or something, but it was getting really, really weird. Okay, so John Metchie. That brings us to John Metchie, which this is a tricky one. I don't want to go as far as McClain says when he says, hey, it's like having an extra draft pick. But you do have to remember that, look, it's not like Nick Caserio inherited this draft pick. And D'Amico comes in, and he's, a defensive-minded coach. I think he's going to defer to his offensive coordinator and his GM quite a bit, I would imagine. But I have a hard time thinking that any of the offensive coaches aren't going to really like the idea of John Metchie. The question is just going to be, okay, how is he coming back from cancer treatment? And remember, before the cancer treatment, he had his ACL. And before his ACL, when he was in high school, he had an enlarged heart, which isn't as big a deal usually. Usually it's not a big deal as long as, you're aware of it. They monitor you and everything. But there's actually quite a few athletes that have an enlarged heart. Sometimes it gets picked up in a scan now because everybody scans for it. So, but there's multiple concerns. And as I've told you guys, I don't feel right just saying like, well, Metchie will get his stuff together and he'll be out there. But if he does, if you look at some of the free agent wide receivers available in this class, none of them excite me or make me feel like they should take the place of John Metchie competing for a spot. So just to remind you of John Metchie's competitiveness, he does have speed, but not breakaway speed. I mean, he's an intermediate threat. That's why I'm not all that intrigued by, I'm blanking on his name, the free agent receiver out of New England, because he's kind of an intermediate threat too. So John Metchie, who's been around, was able to watch and observe and learn about NFL offense. Obviously, things will be a little bit different right now. But, like, right there, I mean, like, his willingness as a smaller guy, and he's not super small, he's about 200 pounds, to mix it up, to lay his shoulder into people. Okay, maybe I don't want him to do that all the time in the NFL, but you can get away with it in college. This is a kid that you're going to want to root for. And I think I was glad that Jeremiah included Metchie in that, because I see a lot of people that haven't necessarily Jacoby Myers. Thank you, Ro. Ro Bezel says, yeah, Jacoby Myers. Tony Ayayo says, Jacoby Myers sucks. Come on, man. We're keeping it positive here, man. Let's see. Dougie Fresh. Do you think that Young will be able to compete with the other QBs in the AFC? I mean, that's the plan if he comes in. The biggest question about him, I feel like we've gone over his body weight enough, and a lot of people have and will. I think you do also have to recognize that, yeah, there's challenges in being a shorter quarterback too. It's not like all of a sudden, because Russell Wilson and Drew Brees, and then, Kyler Murray had a promising rookie year, maybe with a different coach, he would have advanced further along. But it's not like it's not a factor at all anymore. For those timing routes and for some of those throws over the middle on 3-step drops, it's still a big deal. So I think that the question is, with a guy like that, who's, I hesitate to say he's not as athletic as Russell Wilson. He's not going to be a threat to run like Russell Wilson, but I think he can buy his time and I think he has more pocket sense and awareness than Russell Wilson did when he was in college. I think Bryce Young has shown these kind of micro movements within the pocket where he knows when it's appropriate to take half a step, one step, whether to actually scramble, all those things. And the level of difficulty gets harder in the NFL, but it does speak to somebody who maybe will be able to move into lanes. Here's two things that Drew Brees was really good at. He was able to, three things I'll say. He was able to kind of drift into his passing lanes, and they designed the offense around him that way too. But to be able to throw into open lanes where defenders weren't, and the second part of that is to have the timing to know when the lanes are there. It's more than just the receiver being open; it's the actual passing lane. And then the third was just the way he would stand up and he would kind of look out the bottom of his eyes. He would get as tall as possible, because as much as people love to say, hey, offensive linemen are all taller than most quarterbacks anyway. Yeah, but they're in their stances and when they're pass blocking, they're shorter. So a tall, statuesque quarterback like Tom Brady, he can see over those guys, whereas a shorter guy like Tua Tagovailoa took some ridicule for talking about this earlier this year. They have a harder time seeing it. So it's just something they have to account for. And Bryce Young, I think, has shown that anticipation. He's shown that ability to read defenses that I think they can work with him on that. And then, obviously, in a Kubshanistani system, using the bootleg, using RPOs, using all those things, that gives him a leg up too. It's just that he has to be that much better at those things than the guys who are 6'4", 6'5". I'm going to answer a few questions here, and then I want to watch this. I'm going to watch this piece. I would call it a hit piece, except I like the kids that run this channel. Let's see. Sean G says, if the Texans trade up to get and they are wrong, I don't know if it is worth what you're giving up to get him. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Yeah, that's where I am right now. And it's going to be a torturous couple months trying to land exactly where I want to on this. I think that Bryce Young, because of the unknown about his size, it makes him much harder to stomach trading up for. And I think to trade up and give up, say, you know what, the Bears, and you might say this to the Bears, like, hey, you guys gave up your pick, a third, a fifth, and was it a next year third? Whatever it was, to get Mitch Trubisky. And Mitch Trubisky was not an Andrew Luck or a Trevor Lawrence or a Peyton Manning type of quarterback. You traded up a good chunk. You traded up that much to move up a spot. That seems like a good deal for you. For the we'll do exactly what you guys did. I might be able to stomach that, but I think more than anything, I think most teams are going to feel just like what you said, which is, I don't want to trade up for him. I like the kid, but I want to trade up for him. I think the fact that I've sat in and thought about this too, and trying to get into Jim Irsay's head is a perilous task, and yet I did it because I care. But the other day when Jim Irsay kind of jokingly floated out that, hey, the kid from Alabama looks pretty good, he did it in the spur of the moment. He was joking around. It may have just been a complete Jim Irsay being goofy moment, and yet I think Irsay is still sharp enough to know that he shouldn't be floating exactly who they like up there, but also not savvy enough to do it because we know that he knows that we know that he shouldn't be doing it. So he's somewhere in the middle there, just kind of like his guitar playing. He's good enough, but people let him do it because he's super, super rich. Likewise at that press conference, he's not really smart enough to be talking the way he was, but he gets to do it because he's super rich. So I don't think they want to move up for Bryce Young. I don't think he throws that out there unless he was just trying to inject some doubt into the Texans' mind. I think the Texans, if they are to engage in skullduggery at all, if they are to try to play that smoke game, I would say try real hard to make it look like you love these edge defenders or these defensive linemen, or perhaps not one of the tight ends, one of the cornerbacks, perhaps. I would start throwing that out there a lot, and frankly, I think the more flack, the better. Sometimes nobody. It's like in military, I'll always tell you, you get too much intelligence, and it's the worst thing possible because how do you separate the signal from the noise? So. Except As I just told you, don't think that you're smart enough to separate the signal from the noise. I think I can do it with Jim Irsay. I don't know Jim Irsay personally, but I know enough people like Jim Irsay that I've played cards with guys like Jim Irsay. I think we'll be all right. Ali, yeah, I'm saying that probably helped with his ACL recovery. Without having seen what you are responding to, Cameron, I am going to guess that you're saying that John Metchie having an extra year off might have helped with his ACL recovery. I'll take that. And you know what? One thing... I get these Irsay comments. One thing that about that is that he did, according to Casario, John Metchie looks better physically than he did when he first came to the Texans. And I think perhaps maybe with his rehab and everything, that was part of it too. Let's see. I would rather take the second quarterback off the Texans board than trade up for Young. That's where I am. Not maybe that way specifically, but I think, you guys hear me talk a lot about if you're an actual GM and not just like what we do where we get to pretend we're GMs. When you're an actual GM or just in personnel in general, you have to have a certain level of humility because everybody's wrong a lot. You mess up. Like if you're in that business, you're going to be wrong a lot. And I think that with quarterbacks, especially these days, where in the past you used to have 3 or 4 years of starting experience with these guys, and you got a pretty good feel for what their strengths and weaknesses are. There's just so much more projection that goes on now. And even though quarterbacks are passing more than ever, and in some ways they're smarter, they also are running a much different version of offensive football in college typically than they're going to see in the NFL. And it makes it much more of a crapshoot. So I sit and I watch Bryce Young, and I feel like he's got a casual competence to him that and a command about him that isn't easy to coach into somebody. And yet, I think that part of that might just be him being precocious. It doesn't mean that his upside is necessarily and definitively better than C.J. Stroud's or Will Levis's. It's just that I can see it right now. And that makes me more comfortable with him. But he's tiny. And I can't see past that part of it. That's the part that that turns into something that I'm just not quite sure about. I'd love to get to the root of Cameron's comment. Wait for Archie Manning. Habibi says we can't wait forever, man. Sean G says if the Texans trade up and let's see. I already read that one, right? Okay. What about Alan Lazard? Big body, could be a very good blocker. Yeah. Where I am right now is that between Nico Collins, John Metchie, and I think that's where we'll get a feel for what the Texans are looking for in the draft by whether or not they go after a receiver in free agency. Of course, okay, if they don't go after a receiver in free agency, even obviously there's nobody exciting out there, Jacoby Myers, anybody like that, they're not all that exciting. If they went for a guy like that, I would feel like they're definitely getting a quarterback, because otherwise, if you're not, or excuse me, I would definitely feel like they're getting a quarterback. Because otherwise, you might as well just wait and try to get as much talent as possible at the other positions, including wide receiver. So you already have 2 young wide receivers in Nico Collins and John Metchie. There's only so many reps to go around. Maybe you try to grab another young one, and then see what happens with Brandon Cooks. As far as Brandon Cooks goes, all right, remember where we were a year from today, or a year before today. There were all kinds of rumors that Laramie Tunsil was gonna get traded. Texans wanted to trade Laramie Tunsil. Laramie Tunsil wanted to get traded, and with Lovie Smith coming in, and I think with some semblance of sanity being restored to the organization, there were another couple moves along the way. All of a sudden, Laramie Tunsil has just flopped positions with Brandon Cooks, like 100%. Brandon Cooks had been the golden child, and now all of a sudden he was persona non grata. And they went in and they stripped his captain's patch off his jersey, and then they sewed it on to Laramie Tunsil. I like to think of it like it was done in, those, you remember the old military ceremonies that they did a big expose on where they would pound a pin into a guy's chest? and like they had to go in and somehow rescue the poor special ops dudes who were like the hardest guys on earth, and it was like a badge of honor to have that pounded in your chest. For it, this is old stuff we're talking about now. Okay, 60 Minutes did something and ruined something that was super badass. Anyway, I envision them doing that with Laramie Tunsil, pounding the C into his chest. But I want to know exactly what kind of conversations, or I would love to know. I'm not going to find out, but what kind of conversations D'Amico Ryans is going to have with Brandon Cooks, and especially if Bryce Young is drafted, is Brandon Cooks in the mood to go another year or two with a rookie, or is he just like, no, I want to get out of here and go to a contender? And as much as you got to swallow kind of your anger over that, you try to find him the best place to go and hopefully get a good pick for him. But I think if there's a chance that he can be placated with a young wide receiver, remember when things were good, Brandon Cooks was all about helping out Davis Mills and having conversations with him, talking to him, coming back to the huddle, like doing all those things that he felt he needed to do to help out Davis Mills. If he feels like, okay, I did that with Davis Mills, but now we got Bryce Young, the Texans are loading up with some other talent elsewhere. They got these 2 first-round picks, and maybe he just flat out really likes D'Amico. Then maybe there's an avenue for Brandon Cooks to be around. He's shown he's not a genuine foxhole guy, And I don't know what was said to him behind closed doors. I think when he came here, for whatever his relationship was with Jack Easterby, it was something that was important to him. I might not get it or understand it or believe that it was, founded in anything worthwhile. And yet it was, I think maybe perhaps like he felt like the rug was pulled out from underneath him. And I still don't approve of ever just no showing work, no matter how disgruntled you are. But that it might work out, and it would be good to have him as a resource or as trade bait. So at any point, he's lost the right. If he comes back and he's like, oh, gung-ho, yeah, I love Bryce Young. Man, this is the best thing ever. That's cool and all, but like you've lost the protection. Like no longer will we shy away from trading you away because you really, really are a super duper guy. Like that's it. Somebody offers up something good at the trade deadline, he's out of here unless the Texans are on a miraculous run or something like that. A bunch of people saying that they don't think that Bryce, that the Bears are trading. I just want us to get rid of Cooks, period. A lot of people anti-Cooks. So I'm trying, look, man, trying to be a good dude these days. I'm trying not to be quite the same guy I used to be. Okay, sure. Brandon Cooks is weak as AF. He can go. He doesn't want to be a part of the rebuild. Let his clown ass go. This is the thing, though. We got to remember, only Dylan Thompson can salvage the Cooks-Texans relationship. Perhaps. I think that's where, this is what I felt about Easterby when Easterby came in. And I was skeptical somewhat when he came in. And again, I don't want to go through all the soap opera of it all, but I didn't quite know like how a guy who was awesome as a character coach and like the high five guy was going to enter a position of management where you're part of making decisions on guys, letting them go. And because I had talked to people on the team that basically told me about Jack Easterby's role before the team eventually made it public or before anybody really caught on. And it was just curious to me. It was just curious the way it was happening. But at the same time, I was like, okay, if this guy is as awesome as what he does, then it seems like he should be able to salvage the DeAndre Hopkins thing maybe, or Jadeveon Clowney, or any of these instead of just kicking guys to the curb. Like, is there any way we can actually work with these guys and get better? And to be fair to Easterby, I don't think he ever had an opportunity with Clowney because Clowney was gone. Clowney had been tagged. He didn't sign it, and then they traded him away and all of that good stuff. Now, let's do one more. Once you turn your back on the H, it's a must. You go. Look at James Harden. I know. That's what I keep saying. But they keep talking about bringing him back in. All right. I'm going to do something here. There's these guys on YouTube. It's called J&D Productions. And there are a couple of young dudes that put together videos, and like a lot of times I really enjoy them. They're not always on the nose with accuracy, but they do everything about all these different teams. I want to watch this because basically the title grabbed my attention. I believe the title was "The Texans Are a Stupid Football Team," and it was done a month ago before DeMeco was hired. I think it was done right at the end of the season. So I want to go through this and just tell me. Maybe I'm going to keep score on like which of these things are genuinely stupid and which things are like defendable. And keep in mind too, I want to keep this in mind. I want to find out if they ever mentioned the fact that as some of these hires and mistakes were made, that Cal McNair at one point early in this process was recovering emotionally from the death of his father, and that also and most importantly, the thing that was most public was that Deshaun Watson was trying to force his way off the team while being accused of sexual misconduct by at least 24 women, which kind of clouded the issue a little bit.
After the Houston Texans defeated the Colts in Week 18, Lovie Smith was fired after one season as the Texans head coach. Houston went 3-13-1 and struggled to say the least. The Texans have now fired back-to-back coaches after one season. Houston axed David Culley last January after a 4-13 season. General manager Nick Cassero now has to
All right, Cassero, that's check minus on that one. They said Cassero.
Hire a new head coach for the third straight offseason. Houston has a lot of issues, and Davis Mills does not appear to be the long-term solution at quarterback. It feels like both David Culley and Lovie Smith were put in a horrible situation and not given much of a chance to succeed. The Houston Texans aren't making any progress towards the future and just continue.
Okay, that's a big question. Was David Culley given a chance to succeed? I think that for whatever success would have been defined as with David Culley, I actually think he was. I don't think they expect him to win a bunch of games. You guys, we know exactly where David Culley failed, and it was in grasping the simple and basic concepts of being a head football coach in the NFL. Lovie Smith did not fail in that capacity, but as far as David Culley goes, I think he was given a chance to at least be the legal guardian of this team for a couple of years, and things were going haywire by the end of the year with confrontations between him and Justin Reed, with Laramie Tunsil being out. Things were getting a little bit out of control.
To be a complete disaster. The Houston Texans only had 3 different head coaches through their first 18 years as a franchise. Dom Capers was hired when Houston expanded into the league in 2002. He only lasted 4 seasons and never finished with a winning record. The Texans hired Gary Kubiak in 2006, and he coached the Texans for 8 seasons.
I was at that. Oh man, I was at that pep rally there, where Kubiak got up and spoke. A bunch of you guys were there. I think that was like the event where you can choose your seats, the openings, and everything for the deal. And
he took Houston to the playoffs.
Okay, so Chris Barboza. All right, here's the thing. Who's this jabroni? Chris, I think I know you, so you're not talking about me. But this kid, he's a nerdy little guy on the internet. I like these nerdy little guys. They do these little montages that nobody else would do. And he did get a few things wrong here and there, but that's what you do. They're kids. By kids, I mean they're like 24 years old.
And the Texans beat the Bengals in the wild card round both times before losing in the divisional round. Kubiak was fired in 2013 after the Texans lost 11 straight and Wade Phillips was named the interim. Kubiak went on to coach the Broncos to a Super Bowl victory, and the Texans decided to hire Bill O'Brien. O'Brien coached the Texans.
Okay, let's talk about when they hired Bill O'Brien real quick, because I'm going to come clean and honest. I was super stoked. And you know what? Some of you have called us out on this in the sports media and I think it's accurate. I think there's this kind of gilded memory we have of how we felt about Gary Kubiak, and we forget that, basically Gary was run out of town in a year in which he had a mini stroke on the sideline. I remember somebody from the national media DM'd me in the middle of that season, towards the end of the year, and they're like, they can't fire Gary, right? He had a stroke on the sideline. And I was like, well, yeah, but they're bad. So it was, but But I think when I talk about the Kubshanistani offense and everything, there were still elements of the offense I really liked. I do think that obviously it wasn't like it was a fairy tale ending there or anything. There was a lot more to it than met the eye. But I think Kubiak, in going on and winning the Super Bowl, all the rest of it, it's just like you pick out the good things. Just like I think eventually people will learn to remember the good parts of Matt Schaub. But back to the nerdy fella.
For 7 seasons and did have a lot of success. Houston made the postseason 4 times and won in the wild card twice. O'Brien was appointed the general manager in 2020 and everything fell apart.
Okay, appointed. Dude, they appointed him the general manager. All right, yes.
Fast.
If I had a little buzzer or a bell to point, I don't think he even called that out as one of the stupid things they did. They appointed him general manager.
He made a very questionable move, trading DeAndre Hopkins, and didn't even get a first-round pick back. Houston started that next season 0-4, and he was fired. Romeo Crennel took over as the interim. That offseason, the Texans hired David Culley just to fire him a season later, and
okay, yeah, just to fire him a season later. Yeah, okay, yeah. It was fine that we fired. Nobody was blaming David Culley. Like, it wasn't even. I kept seeing people say, like, well, the Texans, I can't believe they fired him because he didn't win any games. No, they fired him because he turned down a penalty so he could punt. He could have had an extra third down. He turned down a penalty so he could punt. That's why he admitted at the end of the season that he hadn't learned until that year that sometimes the best way to get the offense going is to actually just go up tempo a little bit. Somebody had to explain that to him. He came in after a game once and said that he didn't know what to tell the team at halftime, so that other guys figured it out and they went out and they so anyway.
Same with Lovie Smith, who has actually had a very successful coaching career. Lovie Smith played linebacker and defensive back at Tulsa, where he was
Now that's a good-looking younger man right there.
a 2-time All-American. He immediately started coaching after his graduation, and he was
I don't know why we're going through the deep dive biography of Lovie Smith here.
hired as the defensive
I know these kids try to get the videos up over 8 minutes so they get extra
coordinator
ads.
at his alma mater, Big Sandy High School, where Lovie won 3 straight state titles and was All-State 3 times. Lovie made the jump to college in 1983 when he became the linebackers coach at Tulsa. He was a positional coach at the college level for over a decade at a multitude of Power 5 schools before he finally made the jump to the pros. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers
This is like a 4-minute biography of Lovie Smith in the middle of a piece on how stupid the Texans are. This is the greatest insult of all.
hired Lovie Smith to be their linebackers coach in 1996. Under Tony Dungy, Lovie helped develop
We're
the
up to
Tampa
1996.
defense. He stayed in Tampa Bay until 2001 when he became the defensive coordinator for the St. Louis Rams. He completely flipped around the Rams defense, and St. Louis made the
That's
Super
true.
Bowl in 2001 but lost to the Patriots. Lovie Smith was hired to be the head coach of the Chicago Bears in 2004. He was the Bears head coach for 9 years. Chicago had a winning record in 5 of those seasons and made the NFC Championship twice. Chicago made it all the way to the Super Bowl in 2006 but fell to the Colts. Lovie finished his tenure in Chicago 81 and 63.
Oh, okay, all right.
After
If these
the
sons of bitches, if they leave off, if they go right from Chicago to Houston, I take back everything nice I said about these kids.
season and was hired in 2014 to be the head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tampa Bay struggled and went just 8-24 over 2 seasons. Lovie ended up taking the head coach job at Illinois and struggled. The Fighting Illini made a single bowl and never had a winning record under Lovie. Lovie Smith was the defensive coordinator for the Houston Texans under David Culley in 2021.
All right, you know what? I'm a hypocrite. For one, I apologize. I didn't know this was going to be 4 minutes of Lovie Smith biography. But also, I'm a hypocrite because this morning I kept saying, like, how the hell was Cliff Kingsbury hired to be a head coach after 4 losing seasons in a row at Texas Tech? Like, after failing at Texas Tech over and over again, despite having very productive offenses, but he failed as a head coach. He got a job in the NFL. I mean, that's exactly what happened with Lovie Smith, except that Lovie, it's different because Lovie had succeeded as a head coach in Chicago, and then obviously they they backed their way into Lovie Smith, as somebody pointed out earlier, a little bit like an emergency hire. The way they hired Dusty Baker is an emergency hire, and yet it worked out. That part of it, I can defend the Texans on the Lovie Smith hire, which we're just about to learn about, I'm guessing in like 17 minutes.
After Culley was fired, Lovie Smith was named the next head coach. The Texans were awful. Houston went 3-13-1, and Lovie was fired after a single season. Lovie Smith definitely took something with him from Houston, the first overall pick. Going into Week 18, the Houston Texans were the worst team in football and well on their way to having the first overall pick at the 2023 NFL Draft. Houston was 2-13-1, but the Bears came into Sunday 3-14. If the Texans beat the Colts and the Vikings beat the Bears, Chicago would have stolen the first overall pick. And that's exactly what happened in dramatic fashion. The Bears lost 29-13. That wasn't in question, but Indianapolis almost won. The Colts led 31-24 with less than a minute.
Look at this right here. You know what? I haven't gone back and watched the entire play. Look at this right here. Not to mention, like the Texans had that healthy lead. Remember, all was lost in the third quarter when the Texans looked like there was no way they could lose. And then look at that.
The Texans faced a long 4th and 20 with the game on the line. Davis Mills managed to find Jordan Akins in the end zone for a touchdown. And
Go through his hands.
Got it to win the game and fall back to the second pick at the draft. Davis Mills doesn't care about a potential first overall pick that was surely going to be his replacement. Lovie Smith may have known that he was already 1 foot out the door. Davis Mills will never have to buy a drink in Chicago, and the Bears.
All right, okay. All right, are you guys buying that? Chicago knows what Davis Mills looks like, other than from neck memes?
For that first overall pick, that will likely be Bryce Young or C.J. Stroud. The Texans need to either try to move up one spot to ensure they get the guy they want, or have to settle for the second best quarterback off the board. The future of the Houston Texans is very bleak, and one of the most important questions
here's where we get
to ask is what happens to Davis.
All right, so this is where from a month ago. It's incredible how stark the difference has gone, because J&D Productions, and I will look, they do good stuff. They have a piece out right now that is a lot more positive about the Texans. But this is just like a little trip down memory lane of what it was like a month ago before DeMeco Ryans was hired, when according to everybody like outside the city of Houston, there was just no way that anything good could ever happen again in Houston.
Mills. The Houston.
And this guy's question is, what's going to happen to Davis Mills? Nobody cares.
The Texans selected Davis Mills in the 3rd round of the 2021 NFL Draft. Deshaun Watson was inactive his rookie season, and Mills was the 2nd string behind Tyrod Taylor. Tyrod suffered a hamstring injury in Week 2, and Davis Mills stepped in. Houston was 2-9 in games he started. Mills passed for 2,700 yards, 16 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. Mills was named.
I shouldn't say nobody cares. I honestly, depending on who they take, if they take Anthony Richardson, Davis Mills might end up starting this season. If they can make some progress, it'll be a check plus in Slowick's favor, and maybe we see something more out of Davis Mills. But so I don't want to go all Schaub-like treatment on here. I care.
2022 season, and ended up going 3-11-1 in its starts. He threw for 3,100 yards, 17 touchdowns, 15 interceptions, tying Dak Prescott for the most in the league. He has been fine for a placeholder that the Texans desperately needed, but it's no question that Houston is better off going in a different route at the 2023 draft to find a franchise.
All right, okay. I'm going to write that on the things the Texans have done that were dumb. And you guys have been keeping tabs. The Danny Amendola, Rex Burkhead dynamic. I understand, I think what they were going for, which was they wanted to have some guys who could be good in pass protection, obviously who could pick up the offense and everything. But man, I feel those can't be the only guys out there, right, that could do that stuff.
Quarterback. Unfortunately, that leaves Mills on the bench or starting until the rookie is ready to play. There are not many positives for the Houston Texans, but Dameon Pierce is one of them. The Houston Texans took Dameon Pierce in the 4th round of the 2022 NFL Draft. Pierce had good numbers in 4 years at Florida. He got plenty of playing time from the jump in Houston as a rookie and broke out. Pierce suffered an ankle injury in Week 14 2018 that landed him on injured reserve.
Were you guys like me? Were you kind of happy that, oh, shoot, you know what? I went back to the wrong part of the video. All right, we've seen enough of those guys. Like I said, J&D Productions, they did they do a nice one after the D'Amico Ryans hire that makes a little bit more sense. I also didn't like that early on when they were showing how stupid the Texans were. They were showing a picture of Cal McNair and Andre Johnson was behind him. I don't like Andre getting caught up in those stray bullets. Okay, we don't need to add Andre Johnson to any of this nonsense. Oh, but that does remind me. Before we get to some of the stupid stuff, Andre Johnson, I think this year especially, we talk about Jordan Addison and Quentin Johnston or any of these other receivers, and I know Andre's been involved, on again, off again, sometimes more involved, sometimes not. But I think in talking to a guy like Quentin Johnston and being around him, whether it's at practice or just in the scouting process, I mean, that's a guy that's a skinnier version of Andre Johnson, but with an extra T in his name. And I think like getting Andre's feel for exactly how committed is this guy to being a better route runner, all of that. I feel good about that. I feel good about Andre right now, like being at that D'Amico Ryans press conference. The group of us that were there was funny. It was from like all different eras and ages, and it was Andre and Cushing were the two guys. It's interesting. They kind of have a aura about them, and they both look like they could just still strangle a bear too. They're just Cushing especially. He's into MMA now and everything. But just to see those two guys, front and center, like at the press conference, they were sitting up in the front row, and they're going to do some things with D'Amico afterwards. So it's cool to see those guys. And I know we've already seen it with Andre the last few years. Cushing, not as much. I've seen Arian Foster around a little bit here and there. So I think that some of that which has been important to Cal for really a long time. Like Cal more so than Bob, I think, just feels closer to the game of football because he played it and he walked on at Texas. He's always really tried to do things for the former players to bring them into the fold and try to have as much of a collegiate feel as possible. So that part's pretty cool. I think, like, obviously the idiotic stuff is we go through the memory lane of the DeAndre Hopkins trade. Obviously, I'd kind of blocked out that the team itself actually felt like that David Johnson was gonna be okay. That part I'd kind of just blanked on completely. The firing of Brian Gaine in general. Remember what a shock that was, what a surprise that was, and even at that point though, I don't think anybody. They were trying to get Caserio. Caserio fell through. They interviewed a few candidates, and then they just said, we're rolling with Bill. And then I guess that's when people started getting nervous. So I think some of the quote-unquote stupid stuff, really, a lot of it can be traced back to allowing Bill O'Brien and Jack Easterby to have more control and power than they should have. Maybe the hiring of Brian Gaine originally. And that's not anything against Brian Gaine at all. I think it was just going to be a bad relationship between Bill O'Brien and Brian Gaine. Like that was destined to failure, apparently. So that's probably it. But other than that, everybody, at least for the most part, feels pretty good about everything. People and how they treated Matt Schaub. I truly regret tagging Pick 666 on the garage door of Matt Schaub's home. Why couldn't we have gotten that Lovie Smith? I know, the Lovie Smith that. Well, we kind of did. That's the problem, is we got the Lovie Smith from 2006, which was a Lovie Smith whose philosophy wasn't really going to work in the modern NFL. And he also, like, he was not set up to have even mediocre success. That part is true. That's what's frustrating sometimes is people will say something that's true, which is, well, David Culley and Lovie Smith didn't have a chance to succeed. Right, that's true. Lovie Smith especially knew what he was getting into. I'm pretty sure David Culley did. Nobody else was talking to David Culley about being a head coach, like at least not seriously. And I think David Culley, when he showed up and acted like he didn't even know that Deshaun Watson had requested a trade, I I felt like, okay, this is a guy who's just already knows he's got a bat in the hatches, and he's just here for the ride to see. And so that was a big mistake by the Texans, is in hiring an interim coach. Like, they basically hired a long-term interim coach in David Culley, but they undershot it. They thought, and I don't know why, I think they felt like if they had a swell guy in there, that's all they needed, and everything would be cool. And forgetting that, players can sense when a guy's just a swell guy and not a whole lot more than that. Let's see. The turning point in franchise history was the press conference right after the season. I think Cal has learned to be a better owner, and because of that, Caserio is a better GM. It starts with the owner. Yeah, I think that's 100% true. Like, it's always about the mix of owner and head coach and GM. And sometimes you can have three solid people there amongst those three entities, but if they don't mix well or they don't work together well for whatever reason, it's not even anybody's fault. You're kind of doomed to failure. And I think that's probably what it was with Bill O'Brien and Brian Gaine. I don't know. Maybe Bill O'Brien just flat out is too stubborn or has too many blind spots to work with anybody, but who knows? So that's it. I appreciate you guys hanging out. And again, your comments are awesome. I always feel like you guys expose a blind spot in my arguments in a good way, like at least 4 times every time we do one of these. So it's awesome to be able to have this conversation, and where, you're somewhat, I kind of somewhat know who you are, even though it's a screen name, as opposed to our text line on the radio show where it's just a random number calling me an idiot. Here I know who you are when you're calling me an idiot, and I will reevaluate my position on Brandon Cooks. I promise. I keep me honest on that one. All right, buddies, which I've